There we go. So a recording of this session will be available online in the Homebase platform. So finally, to introduce myself, my name's Travis. I am an immigration attorney, but I used to be a visa officer. I was a career diplomat with our foreign ministry, with the State Department, is what we call it in the United States. And most of that career was spent abroad, where I interviewed tens of thousands of visa applicants from all over the world. Now, many of those applicants were students, especially during the busy summer months, the Northern Hemisphere summer months, when many students are seeking visas to start in the fall intake. And quite often, and I will say all too often, I found that I was having to deny applicants who may be qualified, but they just didn't know how to express their qualifications during the interview. And you'll hear when I talk about the interview in a moment, it is a very fast process. I used to interview well over 120 people, often over 150 people every single day. And that means that I didn't have enough time to pull details out of each applicant. So if you're not prepared to explain why you should be approved, chances are pretty good you will be denied. And that is totally avoidable in almost every situation. And so I decided to dedicate my career as an immigration attorney to helping students, just like each of you, navigate through this process, not only successfully, but also avoiding complications to make this as smooth a process as it can possibly be. So, before I jump into this, I am a lawyer. I mentioned that a minute ago, but the purpose of this presentation is not for me to provide legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, please do not leave this to chance. The visa interview is not a formality. It does not matter which school you are planning to attend. You have to present your qualifications. And if you think you might be facing complicated situations, please reach out to an immigration attorney to make sure you're proceeding in the most strategic way possible. Okay, so let's talk about the student visa process. I'm going to talk about the end-to-end process here that all of you will at least soon be going through if you haven't started already. So the process begins when you have been admitted into a school in the United States. That school will issue you an I-20 form, which many of you have probably already received by now, given that it's early May. But if you haven't received that form, it's a two-page bureaucratic government document, and it simply confirms that you have been accepted by a school that is allowed or permitted by the US government to admit international students. Now, with that form in hand, you can start your visa application process. You start that process by going online and filling in an online application form called the DS-160. I'm going to talk about that form in a minute, but when you're done with the DS-160, when you have submitted that form, then you can schedule your visa interview. Now, a recent development, as of last September, the State Department now limits non-immigrant visa applicants, including student visa applicants, to only schedule the visa interview in their home country or their country of residence. Now, for many of you, if not all of you, that probably means you should schedule your interview in the country that issued your passport, the country where you are a citizen. But if you are a permanent resident in a foreign country, or maybe if you're a long-term resident in a foreign country, you might be able to schedule an interview there. However, it's not guaranteed. And so the safest path forward is to plan to schedule your interview in your home country. Now, if you are from India or China, or to a lesser extent, Brazil and several other countries, the wait time to schedule an interview is starting to expand. And so you may find that if you log in right now to schedule a visa interview, that first available interview may not be for several months. And so I told you earlier, I will say this several times, do not wait to start this process. If you have not already done so, first of all, make sure you get that I-20 form from your school as soon as you can. Then immediately go and fill out your online DS-160 form so that you can proceed immediately to schedule the earliest visa interview you possibly can. Now, after your interview, your visa officer will need to review your social media. I'll talk about what that entails in a moment. And then finally, your visa will be approved. Hopefully, all of you will be successful and you can travel to the United States. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that you should start this process as early as you can. Let's work backwards from the date you need to be in the United States to think about when kind of the latest possible date that you can schedule the interview might be. So, on your I-20 form, for those of you who haven't received it, it looks like this. There will be a program start and end date, which I have outlined in red here. Now, the program start date on this example is the 14th of August. That is the last date. It's basically the deadline by which you must be physically present in the United States. So at your interview, your visa officer is first going to look at that date, and they need to be confident that you can travel to the United States before that date. So if you wait too long to schedule your interview, let's say your interview is maybe on August 13th, well, there's no feasible way that you can travel by August 14th at this point. That will result in a denial of your visa. So apply as early as you can because you want to make sure you can be in the United States by that program start date. Keep in mind that you can't enter the United States more than 30 days before that date. And there is another box here where it says earliest admission date, which is 30 days before the program start date. And so think of these two dates as kind of the bookends, the earliest and the latest that you can travel to the United States with your F1 student visa. So working backwards from that date, you should generally, as a general rule, schedule your interview at least 1 month before your program start date, if not more. And that is because there are a couple of automated processes that must conclude after your interview before your visa may be approved and printed and put in your passport. So don't delay. If you find that you can't schedule an interview in time, you may still have a couple of options, but that's a good opportunity to reach out to us and we can explain how we can help. So I want to talk about the DS-160. As I mentioned earlier, this is the online application form, which really marks the first step in your application. So once you get your I-20 form, I want you to double check that everything is accurate. There's no errors. Your name is spelled correctly. Your date of birth is accurate. And if everything looks good, you should immediately go online to ceac.state.gov, where you'll see a form that looks like this. Now, in the form, there are a couple of questions. There's actually several questions, but none of them are difficult. This form only asks for your background, your family's information, your work history, and your education history. Only you know these details best. So please do not put this in the hands of somebody else. I know that in many parts of the world, it is very common to hire an agent or a service provider to fill this form out for you, but I deal with applicants almost every single day who are facing major complications because some service provider made a mistake in this form. This form is really the first step in a process that is, quite frankly, a test of your credibility. If your visa officer during your interview finds any detail in this form that is not accurate, it could be an honest mistake, could be that a service provider just skipped a question altogether, but it could also be an indication that you're trying to hide something or you're trying to lie about something. Your visa officer won't know which it is. And so if they find any discrepancy, the best outcome you can hope for is unfortunately a denial. So fill this form out yourself. Be honest. Offer complete details. Don't hide anything. As a general rule, assume that your officer knows the answer to every one of these questions already. In some instances, that is true. And if you keep that perspective, you will be honest about everything and you will be in a much better place, even if there are some maybe details in your past that you're not super proud of. Now, once you submit this form, your answers are locked in place. You cannot, for some weird reason, you cannot go back and change anything. So, if you find that you have made a mistake after you submit the form, the only thing you can do is submit an entirely new form. You have to go through this whole process again, and then there's no guarantee that the embassy or consulate will even accept the new form. So please check your answers several times before you hit that submit button. And I would also recommend that you print your responses before you submit it as well. The system's weird, and after you submit your responses, you can't even go back and review the answers you provided. So, I did mention after your interview, there is now a mandatory social media review step. That actually starts in the DS-160. There's a question in the form that asks if you have used any social media platforms within the last 5 years. Now, let me be clear here. This includes social media that you have never actively posted anything on. So, for example, if I have a YouTube account, but I've never posted a video on it, I still must note that in this part of the DS-160 form. Your visa officer has been instructed that if they find an account that you did not mention on your DS-160, they are to take that as a sign that you are not credible, and that will almost certainly lead to a denial of your application. So in the form, there's a drop-down menu. These are the platforms that the State Department cares about. Now, this always makes me laugh a little bit because MySpace is listed on here, which I doubt anybody uses anymore. But other platforms like WeChat and TikTok don't appear at all. So, whatever reason behind that is, take this to be a very literal question. If you have any of these accounts, even if you have deleted them, even if you have never actively posted anything on any of them, if any of those accounts have been active within the past 5 years, you must list them in this part of the form. Now, as a general rule, if you have an account that is still active, I would recommend that you include the URL, the website address, instead of just your username where it says social media identifier. That will help your visa officer go straight to your account to review your content, and it can save some time. The other requirement is that all of your accounts are set to public because, of course, your officer needs to easily look at your content, at the posts that you've added. And so it is a requirement to set your accounts to public before your interview. But as soon as you get your passport back, you can switch your accounts back to private if you want to. So, of course, the question all of you are probably thinking about is, what is the officer looking for as they review my social media? Well, they're looking for several things. First of all, they're looking for evidence of situations that hopefully don't apply to anybody attending this session. They're looking for examples of things like you're supporting a terrorist organization, you're engaging in illegal activities, or they're looking at examples of hostility towards the US government or anti Semitism or hate speech. Again, hopefully none of that applies to any of you. But beyond these, they're also looking for examples of something that may be a little bit more trivial, a little bit more mundane. I have seen students face complications because they had a post on Facebook of what looks like they may have been working in the United States without authorization under a previous visa. One example was a picture of somebody that looked like they were working in a restaurant in New York City while they were in the United States on a tourist visa. Well, you can't work while you're on a tourist visa. So if that is what it was, then that would have been evidence of a previous visa violation, and that can raise serious concerns. But where I've seen the most complications come during this social media review is inconsistencies. So remember, I said everything in your DS-160 needs to be 100% accurate. So if any detail in your DS-160 doesn't match exactly with what you say in your interview and what you have online, that can lead to questions about your credibility. Where I've seen this happen most often is with LinkedIn. So let's say in your DS 160, you indicate that you started your last job on May 1st, but in your LinkedIn profile, you say you didn't start that job until July 1st. Well, this could be a typo. It could just be, an honest mistake, but it could also be that you were trying to inflate the amount of time you've worked in that job so that maybe you'll be better qualified for a visa. So even though it could have been an honest mistake or even a typo, your visa officer will look at that discrepancy with a lot of skepticism. And they will start to question if they can trust anything else that you say. And that alone can lead to a denial. So let me be clear here. I do not recommend that you delete any social media posts or any other content. I'm aware that visa officers may be able to see deleted posts in some situations. And if they find something that you deleted, that can, of course, raise even more concerns. So, what I would suggest as you're preparing for your interview is to first look through your online content. And if there's anything that may trigger a conclusion that you fit into one of these categories, or if there's anything that may look like you violated a previous visa, be prepared to explain that if the officer asks you about it. I would also recommend that you review your social media to make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that all of the details, whether it's on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or whatever else, make sure everything is accurate. Because if your officer finds anything that doesn't completely coincide with what you put in your DS 160 or what you explained during your interview, again, that can lead to major concerns. So I will tell you that complications from social media review are very rare. For almost all of you, if not all of you, this should not be a problem, but it is still important that you list all of your accounts in your application form and that you make sure everything is accurate and you're prepared to explain anything that might trigger a concern or maybe lead to the wrong conclusion. Okay, so now I want to talk about the visa interview. You've gotten your I-20 form, you've submitted your DS-160 application. Now it's time to go in for your interview. At the interview, for those of you who have not yet appeared for a US visa interview before, it will probably surprise you how fast it is. I mentioned earlier that I used to interview well over 120 people every single day. And that meant that I had on average 1 or 2 minutes, maybe up to 3 minutes per interview before I could make my decision and move to the next applicant. And because of that, I was trying to do a lot kind of simultaneously to reach my decision as quickly as I could. When you arrive at the interview window, your officer will scan a barcode either on the back of your passport or on your DS 160 confirmation sheet, and that will pull up all of your information on their computer screen. Now, contrary to what you may have read online, this is the first time they know anything about you. They are not making a decision about your application before your interview. It's not actually possible for that to happen. So they're going to pull your details up on their computer screen. They will see notes from previous interviews if you have interviewed before. They will look at your DS 160 responses, and they will see if you have a pending green card application or if you've been arrested before. So please be honest about all of those questions when you're asked. They will then start the interview, probably while they're still looking through your details. And that means that your officer may be buried in their computer monitor while they ask you the first question without even looking at you. And that can be a little bit rude, a little bit disarming. So I want you to expect that. I don't want it to be a surprise, and I don't want it to kind of throw you off. During your interview, please do not try to rely on documents, but instead focus on explaining your qualifications in English. Officers are trained not to rely on documents to reach their decision. Documents can be fake, they can be confusing, and the whole reason the United States requires you to come in person to an interview is so that an officer can establish whether or not you're qualified for the visa based on the verbal discussion. So speak English, not so that the officer can judge how good your English is, but simply so the officer can confirm that you speak a basic level of English such that you can understand what is being taught in an American classroom. And I'll explain why that's important. Let's consider the three factors that your officer is thinking about as they reach their decision. Now, this is really important. This may be the most important slide I share in this entire presentation. This is what the officer is thinking about as they reach their decision. So, number one, they're trying to determine if you are really planning to go to the United States to study. This is where they are making sure you have a basic understanding of English because they need to be confident that you're coming to the United States to enroll in a full course load, to attend class, and to graduate or complete your program. If you don't speak at least basic English, you will not know what's being taught in a classroom. You will not be able to graduate or complete your program. So only basic English ability is required. But the officer, this is a really tough consideration to reach because nobody has a crystal ball. The visa officer cannot know with 100% confidence whether you're really going to study in the United States. But they're going to try to get to that conclusion. They will ask you questions like, why did you decide to go to this school? Why did you decide to study in the United States? What other schools did you apply to? Which schools did you get accepted to? These are all questions designed to understand how you arrived at this decision. What was your motivation to study at this school or in the United States? Why did you choose to focus on this degree or this major? These questions are your opportunity to tell your story, to explain how you arrived at this decision to study in the United States. And the more detail you can offer, the more confident your officer will be, and the better your chance of success. Now, factor number two is your financial arrangements. This is actually pretty simple, even though I know a lot of you probably are worried about it. Your officer is simply trying to establish if you have enough money arranged to pay for your tuition and living expenses. That's it. And so, whatever financial arrangements you've made, you've already had to prove that to your school before they issue your I-20 form. So, simply explain to your officer what you've already proven to your school, and that should be enough. Now, number three is ties to home. Now, the F1 visa is a non immigrant visa, which means it's like a ticket that gets you into the country, but not to move permanently. It only allows you to come to the country as long as you're a student, but then you have to leave. And so the requirement is really that as you stand in front of your visa officer, at that moment in time, you have a present intent to leave the United States after you graduate or after your program comes to an end. Now, something could change while you're in the United States studying. Maybe you're offered a job. Maybe you qualify for an H-1B work visa. Maybe eventually you get a green card. That's great. But what I want each of you to do is think about a scenario where none of that is a possibility. Maybe you can't find a job, or maybe you don't qualify for an H-1B. If nothing is an option in the United States, you have to consider something outside of the country. And that is what I want you to explain at your interview. Now, this next point is really important. The way the law is written, there is a default assumption that you are not qualified for a visa. So that means that it is your responsibility. Think of it as your job during the visa interview to explain why you are qualified. And this is important because there's a lot of misinformation floating around online. You have to be proactive. You have to volunteer as many details and as much context as you possibly can to establish that you really are planning to be a student, you can afford your tuition and living expenses, and at least presently, you intend to leave the United States after you graduate or after your program comes to an end. And so, one word answers or vague responses are not going to overcome this default assumption that you don't qualify. And this is the single most important point for you to keep in mind as you prepare for your interview. What I would recommend is that you start considering and prioritizing the most important and positive details in your situation. And I want you to be prepared to volunteer proactively these details for your visa officer during your interview. So, of course, you need to be prepared to explain the school you will attend, the major you are pursuing, or maybe the degree you're pursuing. And then, very importantly, why did you decide to go to this school? Why did you decide to study in the United States? What led you to this point in your life? You might also explain here what kind of preparations you made for this opportunity. Did you have to study English? Did you take an advanced placement test? Did you have to apply to multiple schools, maybe go to interviews just to get accepted? These are great details to show your officer that you are heavily invested in this opportunity. And it can tend to help establish that you're really a student. Now, you need to also explain exactly how you're paying for your program, for your tuition and your living expenses. And then remember, you have to offer specific plans after you graduate outside the United States to show that you have what we commonly call ties to home, or in other words, that you at least have a present intent to leave the United States after you graduate. So I know that we don't have a lot of time today. I've covered a lot of information. And of course, there's a lot more information that I could cover. There's a lot of nuances in here. So I would urge each of you to go into the Homebase platform. I think Sarah, yes, Sarah has joined. Sarah should be able to share a link in the chat window here. And I think we can also share it after the session concludes. But we have actually loaded a couple of mini courses into the Homebase platform. So we have a course that talks about that step-by-step process to obtain an F1 student visa. We have a course that walks you through those key factors that your officer is going to consider at your interview. We talk about the DS-160 form in a bit more detail, and we offer some tips and best practices. And we give you some insights on how you should prepare for your interview. Remember, this is not a formality. It does not matter what school you plan to attend. You still have to establish that you are qualified for this visa. So these mini courses are a great place to start. They're free to you, and they give you some great information. If you're still interested in additional support, we also have online guides, and there are links to these in those mini courses where we go in depth into the DS-160 application form. We walk you through every single question, and we give you tips on how to answer those questions yourself. We have a course that's designed to help you prepare for the visa interview, which includes video examples of good and bad interviews. And it also includes a proven formula to help you effectively communicate your qualifications to your officer. And then we have a complete end-to-end guide, which covers every step of this journey, including the DS-160, how to prepare for the interview, and a lot more details. And that complete guide also includes live Q&A sessions where you can ask lingering questions that you still have. So if you face specific complications, like I said, please don't leave this to chance. Feel free to reach out to us directly at info@zfvisa.com. We can help you evaluate different options. We can help you understand how certain issues may complicate your application and how to handle those complications. And if nothing else, we can practice mock interview questions with you so that you're confident and prepared on your big day. So with that, Sarah, I want to open this up to Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think we have almost half an hour Let's try to get through as many questions as we can.
Right. Right. So we asked a couple questions beforehand when everybody registered, which means we already have an idea of what y'all are interested in. I'm going to start with the question that came up the most. The number one theme was the 214B denial. How do we how do we address the prior refusals, especially if we have another visa interview coming up?
So let me talk about first what 214B is, and then I'll give you some tips on how to address that. So first of all, 214B is a reference to a law, a statute in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's a federal law in the United States. And this law is what actually says you are assumed not to qualify for your visa unless you can establish that you are qualified. So think about that basically as you're guilty until you prove you're innocent. It's the opposite of every other law in the United States. But if you are denied under 214B, all that really means is that at that slice of time, at that interview, you simply did not convince your visa officer that you qualified for the visa. Now, they never tell you why they deny you. They will give you a form letter which says something like you failed to establish ties to home. But what really happened is you failed to give them enough confidence that either you're definitely going to the United States to study, or that you can afford your tuition and living expenses, or that you're going to leave the United States after you graduate. It could be one of those, it could be two of those, it could be all three of those that you failed to establish. So, first, what I would recommend is that you think back to your interview. And something that helps some people is to actually type out a transcript. Try to remember the questions that you were asked and the answers you provided. Type those out, look through it. Try to take a standpoint of somebody who doesn't know anything about you and ask yourself if you provided enough context, enough details so that your officer had confidence that you're a student who could afford your program and that you were going to leave the country. If you find an area where you could add more detail, that's what I want you to focus on. Now, you should also be prepared during your interview for a question such as, what has changed since your last interview? Now, what that officer is really asking you is, okay, look, I see in my computer system that one of my colleagues determined that you are not qualified for a visa, or you didn't convince them that you were qualified. Why should I reach a different conclusion? And so this is a very aggressive question. I think it's kind of a scary question, but I want you to consider that as an opportunity. Treat that as an opportunity to reiterate your qualifications for a visa. Remind your officer why you're really going to this program, why this program is so important for your future, and exactly what you're going to do outside of the country after you graduate. Now we go into far more detail about how to address previous denials in our online courses. And we can also talk to you one-on-one if you want personalized support. But that's a general kind of outline of how I would address a previous refusal.
Would you ever recommend switching from an F1 to a J1 if you had a prior refusal?
This is a very case by case question. This is where you definitely need to talk to an immigration lawyer. There can be benefits of switching, but there could also be red flags. A future visa officer may look at that and say, well, now you're just trying every, path that you can to get to the country. And it shows kind of a desperation. Talk to an immigration attorney and they can help you evaluate which visa is appropriate for you. And they can help you weigh the pros and cons of your options. That's definitely legal advice though, and I can't really, go any deeper in this forum.
Great. Is there a general recommendation for how soon they can reapply after a visa denial?
So there's a lot of conflicting advice online. Now, 214B is not a permanent or even a lingering punishment. It again, it just means at that moment in time at your interview, You just didn't convince your officer to say yes. So, legally speaking, you can reapply the following day. But practically, that's generally not possible because you have to fill out a new DS 160 form, you have to schedule a new interview. And in some places, India is a really good example. It's very difficult to schedule another interview if you've been previously denied. The reason behind that is the embassy and consulates are trying to prioritize their limited available slots to people who have not yet had a chance to appear for an interview. Now, this can be very unfair, can be very difficult. You may still have some other options. So reach out to us if you're in that situation. We'll explain what you might do. But as a general rule, I want all of you to treat your interview as if it's your only chance. And I don't say that to stress you out. I say that because it genuinely might be your only chance before your program starts to get that visa. Take this seriously. Don't leave it to chance. Make sure you're prepared because hopefully you'll be approved and then you don't have to worry about this.
Right. So during the interview, what's the best way to demonstrate those ties to your home country? Something that like very practically, like how can you prepare for it?
It's a good question. I think, a lot of people assume that they need to own property or have a career waiting for them. That is not an expectation or a requirement, especially for students. I think many of you are just starting out in your education. You haven't even started a career yet. Others of you may be leaving a career to go back to school. So the best way you can show that you have those quote unquote ties to home is by explaining exactly what you're planning to do outside of the United States after you graduate. Now, I don't want you to lie. I don't want you to say that you will be on flight 457 back to Mumbai the day after graduation, and then the following day you're going to start your job at the Travis Company. If that's not the truth, then don't say it. But what I do want you to do is challenge yourself to explain what you hope to do. Don't just say something like, after I graduate, I will find a good job or I will start my career. I used to hear that all the time from F1 applicants. What I really want you to do is challenge yourself to think about a specific company, even a specific job title that you would like to have, and then consider how this degree that you're pursuing will unlock your access to that career path. That's how I want you to treat your interview. And that honestly is the best way you can show that you have ties to home.
I'm going to use that as a segue. Would a good example of a tie to home be that you have your family, like there's a family business, they're the ones sponsoring you to go to the US. Say I'm like, my goal is to go back to that. And then I'm gonna piggyback off of that saying, if you have a family business that's your sponsor, so it's not a traditional like parent that's sponsoring you, is there a good way to present that during the visa interview?
It's a hard question to answer because the way I would honestly answer this is whatever your honest plan is the best answer. I work with a lot of students. I work with students who are planning to start their own business. I work with students who have a job waiting for them. Maybe they've had a career as a management consultant. And once they finish an MBA degree, they have a position with a promotion waiting for them. I work with students who are making a complete career pivot. Maybe they've had a career in data science and now they want to pursue acting or something totally different. It really doesn't matter what your plan is. What matters is that you can articulate it specifically. So, I'll give you an example. The bad answer would be if the officer says, "What do you plan to do after you graduate?" Well, the bad answer is, "After I graduate, I will go back to my home country and find a good job." You have not told the officer anything. How can they be confident that you have a path that's, at least likely to take you out of the United States? A better answer would be something like, well, I've worked for the past 4 years in marketing at the Travis Company, but I really want to be a manager. But in my company, you can't be promoted to manager without a graduate degree. So that's why I decided to go and pursue my MBA from Sarah University in Miami, Florida. And after I graduate, I'm hopeful that I will, be competitive, that I'll qualify to be a manager of a marketing team at my company. That's a specific path. You're not saying you're definitely going to do that because, maybe you don't get that job, but at least you're explaining exactly what you would like to do with this degree.
Sticking with another financial question. Um, is there is there a preferred funding source that consular officers like to see? Like, do self-funded students have it easier than family-funded students? Like, anything
It's a
that stands
really
out?
good question, Sarah. And this is another question where I would answer this by saying it doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you explain your honest situation. And here's the thing, visa officers are not human lie detectors, contrary to what you may have read online. I never went through training to, spot a lie immediately. But visa officers go through lots of interviews and they do develop a kind of a keen sense for when somebody is being less than fully honest. There's a million ways you can pick up on somebody that isn't telling you the whole truth. And that is where they're waiting for those signs, right? Don't give them that sign. Just be honest. Whether you're paying for your education, you're taking out a student loan, you've got a sponsor, your company's paying for it, it honestly doesn't matter. What matters is that you can explain it. The one caveat to that is that if you are using student loans to pay for your school, your officer may start to wonder how you're going to pay that loan back. Now, if your plan is to go back to a country which has kind of a lower average salary, or maybe you're going into a field that isn't going to pay you much money, your officer may be concerned that you'll have to stay in the United States to make enough money to pay that loan back. So, as you discuss what you plan to do after you graduate, make sure that you kind of volunteer how you're going to pay that loan off as well. That's how you would address that concern. But honestly, otherwise, just be honest about how you're paying for everything.
One more question on finances. If between the time they were issued the I-20 and their visa interview, their funding source changes, should they update their I-20 and notify the school, or can they go to the visa interview with just the updated documents?
So that's a good question. I think if anything that's referenced in your I-20 changes, or yeah, if anything in your I-20 changes, your funding arrangements, your degree, whatever that is, you need to talk to your school and you need to request an updated I-20 form. Now, every school is different. Every school will have different requirements for how they evaluate your financial arrangements and whatever else. So that's really up to you and your school to figure out. But definitely get a new I-20 form. And then you don't necessarily need to make any changes to your DS 160 or your interview. If you're sticking with the same school and the same degree, your CVIS ID, which is a unique identifier that ties you to a government database of international students, that shouldn't change. And so even if your I-20 changes, source of funding changes, degree changes, something like that, you should still be able to proceed with your interview as scheduled. But if you have questions about that, the first place I would recommend that you go is to the international office at your school. They can give you some good advice. If you're still wondering how to proceed, send us an email and we can help.
Now, social media vetting. There's a lot of anxiety around that. I know we touched on it in the presentation. Um, what are some examples of posts that like could trigger a denial or kind of raise a red flag?
So this is something that is a source of a lot of frustration in the immigration law community. It is honestly very unclear what will trigger concerns. And part of the reason is that there are human beings that are reviewing your social media. Your human visa officer is the one that is reviewing your social media accounts. Every human being is different. We all have, different sensibilities. What offends me or concerns me may not even, trigger any emotion from Sarah or vice versa. So it's honestly very difficult for me to advise my clients on how to be prepared. And as a lawyer, that's very frustrating. What I can tell you is, a kind of a general rule of thumb that I think about is if you go through your social media, and as I mentioned earlier, it is a good idea to review your online kind of persona. Make sure it's, accurate, make sure nothing is crazy. I would go through that with a lens of, if this post appeared on the front page of my national newspaper and my grandmother or my grandfather saw it, would they be offended? If they would be offended, ask yourself why. And that might be something that you should be prepared to explain if your officer asks you about it. Now, look, if you have a picture of you, consuming a controlled substance or shooting somebody, or if you're saying something like death to this type of person, clearly that's going to raise some concerns. But hopefully that doesn't apply to any of you. The real question that we as immigration attorneys are asking each other is, where is the line? There's a lot of gray area here. If you want to evaluate your specific case, reach out to me and I'll explain how I can kind of help you proceed and think about this.
Um, Going off of that, we know that a lot of social media vetting is leading to administrative processing. Any sort of input on, like, is there something student can do? I mean, at this point, it's not like proactive, but after the visa appointment, they're in administrative processing. Can they do anything besides just sitting and waiting?
Well, so let me explain what administrative processing is first. It's a very general kind of catch-all term that really applies to any delay. So at your visa interview, your officer is either going to say, "Congratulations, you're approved. Sorry, I can't approve your visa," or "I need more time." And if they say, "I need more time," they will temporarily refuse your application under 221G, which is another law, which is generally called administrative processing. Now that can happen for a million different reasons. Now, first, all of you will undergo this social media review. That will take anywhere from a couple of hours to maybe a couple of weeks, during which time you will be temporarily refused under 221G, and your application will be considered to be in administrative processing. Now, it could also be that the computer system has a glitch and the officer can't click the approve button until the IT team sorts something out. It could be that the officer needs to and yeah, Sarah, I can see your face. That happens more often
Wow.
than you might think. It could also be that the officer needs to review a document. Maybe they need to ask you for a specific document. Maybe they need to talk to their manager about some question that came up. Maybe they're concerned that a document you showed them, like a bank statement, is fraudulent. Maybe it's fake. And they want the fraud prevention team to check it out and tell them if it's legitimate or not. There's a million reasons that you might experience a delay. So if you do experience a delay, or if your officer says they need more time for anything other than social media, that's a great opportunity to reach out to an immigration lawyer. What I would want to do is first identify what likely led to this delay. And then sometimes there's a short window of opportunity for you to provide context. So let's say that your officer is concerned about some confusing situation in in your past. Well, we might be able to work together and provide an explanation for that situation in a way that the officer can understand it, move past it, and approve your application. So that's a great opportunity to reach out to us. We'll let you know if we might be able to help, and then we can take it from there.
Um, That question is not on here, but it's a question I have based on what you said. I saw a couple schools last year with that basically gave the students a template with, hey, here are my social media accounts, my name, a screenshot, a link to them, handing that, like sending that to the embassy to avoid, like to shorten that time of administrative processing. Is that recommended? Is that one of those things they can do? Can they do it before they even go to the visa interview?
I think it can help. I think at this point, visa officers are actually pretty accustomed to going through this process. So I think it was probably more helpful last summer when this was first enacted. I wouldn't say don't do it, but the DS 160 is really kind of the source of information they're using. They're used to it, including the URL, the website, link to your account homepages is actually the best way that you can minimize delay at this point.
You're able to do that on the DS 160?
You can. So in the DS 160 where you explain, each account you have, it just says identifier. So you could enter your username, but you could also enter the URL for that account if it's still active. And if the officer can copy and paste that into a browser window, they can go right to it. There may be 4.5 million Sarahs on Facebook, but if I know exactly which account is yours, then that can save some time.
Oh, let's go into what if there are no visa appointments. I know I've already seen students that their first available visa appointment is at end of August, September. That's obviously after the next cycle of classes start. Any recommendations or any insights on the new slots open up?
Yeah, so this is maybe one of the more stressful things that some of you will face. And so first, I would schedule the earliest interview appointment you can, even if it's far out beyond the program start date. Then I would consider requesting an earlier interview, what's called an emergency or an expedited interview appointment. That's something that we can help with. So reach out to us if you're interested. And then I would also recommend that you continue monitoring that website where you schedule the appointment because new appointment slots are routinely open. People cancel, people reschedule. And also, embassies and consulates do often, I used to manage schedules myself, they often keep a number of appointments open so that they can make them available to students who are potentially at risk of missing their program start date. So I have heard anecdotes, I've not experienced this myself, but I've heard that people are finding new availability if they log into the scheduling website late at night, early in the morning, or on the weekends. I have no idea what this is, but many of my clients have told me that that is how they found an earlier time. So that is something else you can try. If you find that you are just completely out of options, you cannot find an interview in time, I would then recommend that you reach out to the international student office at your school and see what other options you might have. Now, unfortunately, that may mean that you have to defer the start of class by a semester or even a year. That can put your scholarships and financial aid at jeopardy. It's definitely not the best option. But they may be able to do other things for you, like delay the start of your program or give you an option to take the first semester remotely online. I mean, there's a million things that you might be able to do. So reach out to your school and fill them in on your situation and see what might be possible.
Let's say their visa appointment is late, past the program start date, they have to defer from an academic standpoint. Should they still take that visa appointment or should they cancel it and take the later one? Is there
That's
any
a good question.
recommendation?
And it actually depends on a couple of factors. And so I would recommend that's when you maybe send us an email. It's going to depend on how long you had to defer. It will depend on which country you're from, because you may only qualify for a 3-month visa. And so if you go to your interview now for a program that starts in, let's say January, well, your visa will be expired before you can use it to travel. And then you got to get a new visa anyway. So this is where you really should reach out to an immigration lawyer and start exploring your options. For some of you, it might make sense to keep your appointment and just get it out of the way. For others, that may not be an option. Your school may not be able to issue you an I-20 form this early either. If you defer, they may have to wait until they finalize, class numbers and funding. And so there's a lot of things that you may need to think about. So feel free to send us an email and we'll tell you how we can help.
Any sort of comment on, you know, that right now visa interviews have happened in your country of permanent residence or the home country. What if there's nothing available? Under what circumstances can somebody go outside of their home country to apply for a visa?
So, very limited circumstances. Now, there are situations where you might be able to schedule an interview elsewhere, even though it's not kind of publicly advertised as such. There are other situations where you may be able to schedule an appointment if you're maybe studying in a foreign country or you're working in a foreign country. Where I've seen the most complications is where somebody travels to a country for a short term, really just for a visa interview. Let's say that I am working in Canada on a work visa. I've been there for multiple months or even years. It's a pretty good chance that I can schedule an interview there because I reside in Canada. Now, it's not a guarantee though. If I was a legal permanent resident in Canada, then it's as close to a guarantee as you could get that they will allow you to schedule an interview there. If you're not a permanent resident, there is a risk that you show up for your interview and they say, I'm sorry, I can't interview you. You need to go to your home country and schedule something there. And now you're at the mercy of even more delay. So this is another area where, feel free to send us an email. Let us know about your unique situation. We'll give you some thoughts, or we may say we need to talk to you to learn more before we can give you an answer.
Now we're at time. Do you have a bit more availability for a couple more
I
questions or?
have until about 5 past the hour. You want to take maybe a couple more questions?
Okay, I'll have one more. It's about dependents.
Okay.
What does the visa interview look like with bringing dependents? Do you interview separately? Are you together? What should they
I'm so
expect and
glad you
how?
asked that. So, for all of you, you're going to be seeking an F1 visa if you are a student, or even a J1 visa if you're an exchange visitor or research scholar. I didn't talk about much of that in the presentation, but it's basically the same process. If you have family members, spouses, children who are going to accompany you, they will apply separately for an F2 or a J2 if you're a J1 applicant. Now, each of your family members will need to submit their own DS 160. They will schedule separate visa interviews. You can apply together, you can apply separately, it doesn't matter. But the officer will be interested in verifying first that you're actually related. So be prepared to explain, if you're a spouse, how you met your spouse, when you got married. Bring your marriage certificate in case the officer wants to see it. If you're bringing a child, bring their birth certificate. Make sure that it's clear that they're actually your child. And then the second question will be, how are you going, or how are you collectively going to support yourselves financially? Now, F2 visa holders cannot work in the United States. It's a very strict regulation. And so the officer will now want to make sure that you can afford your tuition and living expenses and the living expenses for your family members. And that is where most of the complications come up in F2 visa interviews is it's just not clear that the whole family is going to be financially stable. And that raises concerns that your spouse or maybe your children are going to work without authorization. So again, if you have questions about the interview process, please feel free to reach out. I will put my email address in the chat window. And as I mentioned, we will send a link. I think, Sarah, you already sent a link to our courses in Homebase. That link will be included in a follow-up email as well. That's a great place to start as you're trying to get some guidance and insights for your journey. But please don't leave this to chance. If you don't reach out to me, please reach out to somebody that knows what they're talking about. I would love to see all of you succeed, and I want to wish you the best of luck as you navigate forward.
Thank you so much, Travis. This was fantastic as always. Like you said, we will send out an email with all the resources that we discussed here, links, courses, home-based community, all of the good stuff. Great. Thank you again. And then for the
Thank you,
rest of
everybody,
your,
for joining.
we have a few more coming up, so definitely check our event calendar. And if you have more questions, attend those, submit your questions beforehand. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.